The bustling of dawn filled the air, a constant reminder of the chaotic world surrounding the Undercity. Shadows flickered under the warm glow of scattered firelights, casting eerie patterns on the walls of the last drop. It was a haven for misfits, rebels, and dreamers, and for you and Ekko, it would become a sanctuary. For months, you and Ekko had been dating, along the edge of secrecy, keeping your relationship hidden from the rest of the Firelights. It wasn't that you didn't trust them, but with the pressure on Ekko as their leader, you both knew the scrutiny would follow. Your moments were stolen together, between missions, fleeting touches and whispered confessions when no one was looking. Tonight was actually one of those nights. Ekko leaned against the wall in a small alcove where you had agreed to meet, his usual confident smirk softening when he saw you approaching, his braids tied back loosely, glinting under the dim light, his golden eyes locked onto yours. "You're late," he teased, crossing his arms. "Don't blame me," you reply with a weary smile, brushing past him to lean against the wall beside him. "You know, she's been hanging around the market like she owns the place. It's kind of hard to slip past her without her noticing." Ekko laughed. The sound was familiar. You're getting sloppy, YN. Want me to teach you a thing or two about stealth?" You rolled your eyes. "I'll pass. Thanks. I'm pretty sure I could outrun you if it really came down to it." "Is that a challenge?" He shot back, leaning closer. His breath was warm against her cheek. There was a spark in his eyes, the same one that had always made your heart skip a beat. "Maybe," you whispered, your lips quirking into a grin. Before you could even reply, a distant crash echoed through the tunnels, followed by muffled voices. You both stiffened, instincts kicking in. Ekko's hand found yours, pulling you deeper into the shadows. "Stay quiet," he murmured. His voice was barely audible over the distant commotion. You nodded, heart pounding as you strained to hear the conversation. Two enforcers in their armored glidings faintly passed by the entrance of the enclave. They didn't seem to notice you, too preoccupied with their conversation about increase in patrols. When their footsteps faded, Ekko exhaled, releasing your hand. "They're getting bolder," you said, frowning. "How about before they start raiding the hideouts? It's not gonna be long." "Not long if we don't keep him in check," he replied, his expression softening, but as soon as he turned to you, it turned back. "But that's a problem for tomorrow." "Right," you said, though the weight of the situation lingered in the back of your mind. The two of you would spend the next hour talking in hushed tones, sharing stories and stolen smiles. For the brief moment, it felt like the world outside didn't exist, like the only thing that seemed to matter was the sound of his laugh and the way his fingers brushed against yours when he gestured animatedly. But the illusion was shattered when a voice called out from the main corridor. "Ekko? Lan? You two in here?" You both froze. It was Finn, one of the Firelights, his voice laced with suspicion. Ekko cursed under his breath, grabbing your hand. "This way," he whispered, leading you through the narrow passage that twisted deeper into the tunnels. Your heart raced as you followed, the thrill of the chase mingling with the fear of being caught. Eventually, you two emerged in a small, secluded chamber, lit by one lantern. It was one of Ekko's hiding retreats, a place even the Firelights didn't know about. He released your hand, running a hand through one of his braids, as he paced around the room. "That was close," he muttered, glancing at you. "Too close." Maybe we should just tell them," you said, hesitantly, and crossing your arms. "I mean, it's not like we're doing anything wrong." "It's not that simple, YN," Ekko said. His tone was frustrated, but not unkind. I need them to trust me, to think that I'm focused on the cause, that if they think I'm distracted..." "Then what?" you interrupted, your voice rising. "Then You think they'll turn on you, Ekko? They follow you because they believe in you, not because you're some untouchable hero, you try to explain. But he sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. It's not about that. It's about priorities. I can't risk this, us becoming a liability. The words stung, but you knew he didn't mean it that way. You stood closer, placing an arm around his. We're not a liability, Ekko, you said softly. We're stronger together. You don't have to do this alone. For a moment he just looked at you, his expression unreadable. Then he pulled you into a tight embrace, his chin resting on your shoulder. I know, he murmured. I just don't want to lose you. You won't, you promised. Your voice was firm. The tension between you dissolved as Ekko leaned back, his hands lingering on your waist before his gaze flickered down to your lips, and before you could even second-guess yourself, you leaned in and captured his mouth in a kiss. It was slow and deliberate, a silent reassurance that no matter what happened, you were in this together. The kiss deepened, his hand sliding to your lower back as he pressed you against the wall. Your fingers tangled in his braids, tugging lightly, earning a hum of approval. But the moment was cut short by the sound of someone clearing their throat. You both sprang apart, turning to see Finn standing at the doorway, arms crossed with an unimpressed look on his face. Really? He said, raising an eyebrow. This is where you've been sneaking off to? Ekko groaned, running a hand down his face. Ugh, Finn, I can explain. No need, Finn said, smirking now. Just, maybe pick a better hiding spot next time, yeah? Half the crew's been wondering why you're so distracted lately. You felt your face heat up as Finn turned away, laughing. His laugh echoed down the corridor. Ekko let a resigned sigh, glancing at you with a sheepish grin. Well, he said. Huh? Guess the secret's out, he sighed loudly. Guess so, you replied, unable to suppress a laugh. Despite the embarrassment, there was a sense of relief in knowing you didn't have to hide anymore. Whatever came next, you'd face it together. The dim glow of Zon's city lights filtered through the grime streak of your window. They now casted a fractured pattern across your walls. You now lay sprawled on your small bed. The hum of the city was a constant background noise. Sleep endued you, but your mind was restless and full of thoughts about Ekko, about the firelights, about everything. A soft knock on your window broke the quiet. You froze, sitting up quickly. Few people dared to approach your place unannounced, especially at this hour. But when you glanced towards the source, your heart leapt. Ekko crouched outside, his face partially obscured by the shadow of his head. He stood off the bed and paddled to the window, cracking it open just enough to glare at him playfully. What are you doing here? It's the middle of the night. Ekko grinned, his golden eyes glinting in a faint light. Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd come bother you instead. You rolled your eyes, but you pushed the window fully open and stepped aside so he could climb in. He swung inside gracefully, landing softly on the floor before turning to shut the window behind him. You're lucky I like you, you murmured, through a smile that tugged at the corner of your lips. I'm counting on it, he shot back, pulling his head down and shaking his braids. His confident demeanor softened as he looked at you, his gaze lingering just a second longer than the usual. Besides, I figured we could use a moment. Just us, without Finn barraging in this time. You chuckled, the memory of earlier still making your face warm. I still can't believe we got caught. Yeah, well, we're terrible at being sneaky, Ekko said, smirking as he took a step closer. Or maybe you just don't care enough to be careful anymore. You raised an eyebrow. Oh, so you're saying we should go public then? Ekko hesitated, his smirk faltering. He rubbed the back of his neck, a habit you'd come to associate with his moments of uncertainty. Not yet. Not until I figure out how, I don't know, like, balance everything, he said, trying to explain what was going on in his mind. Ekko, he said softly, placing a hand on his arm. You don't have to figure it all out on your own. We're a team, remember? You felt deja vu from this conversation. It felt just like the one you were having hours earlier. He looked down at your hand, then back up at you, his expression unreadable. I know, he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. It's just easier said than done. The weight of his tone made your chest ache. You knew how much he carried that responsibility on his shoulders. The expectations, the responsibility, the feel of failure. Without thinking, you stepped close to him and wrapped your arms around him, resting your head against his chest. For a moment he stood there, stiff, caught completely off guard. Then he relaxed, his arms encircling around you tightly as he buried his face in your hair. You don't always have to be a leader, you know, you whispered. Sometimes you can just be Ekko. He gripped tighter, briefly, before he looked at you. He pulled back. His face was inches from yours. His golden eyes were soft and full of something you couldn't quite name. Yeah, he said, a small smile playing on his lips. And who am I? When I'm just Ekko. You're mine, you replied without hesitation, the words slipping out before you could even second-guess yourself. Ekko's breath hitched, his eyes widening slightly, and his smile grew slow and warm and genuine. Damn, he murmured. His voice was low. You're really good at this, you know. Good at what? You asked, your voice teasing even as your heart raced. Making me fall for you all over again, he said, leaning in. You barely had time to process his words before his lips were on yours. The kiss was slow and deliberate, full of emotion that you both usually kept buried. His hands on your waist, pulling you closer as he deepened the kiss. You let yourself melt into him, your fingers tangling in his hair as you tilted your head up to give him better access. The road outside faded away, leaving only the feel of his lips and the heat of his touch. The way he made you feel like nothing else mattered. As the kiss grew heated, his hands began to roam, sliding up your sides and down your hips. You gasped slowly, and his fingers grazed over the exposed skin beneath your shirt, the sensation sending a shiver down your spine. Is this okay? He murmured against her lips. His voice was rough and full of restraint. You nodded, your own hands exploring the expanse of his back, feeling the hard lines of muscle beneath his shirt. Yeah, you breathed, more than anything. He groaned softly at your response, capturing your lips once again with renewed intensity. His hand slid under your shirt, the warmth of his palms against your skin, making your head spin. You clung to him, pulling him impossibly closer as the air around you grew heavier. You two moved together, an unspoken understanding, every touch and every kiss. It was desperate and tender all at once, a silent declaration of everything you couldn't put into words. Eventually, you find yourself pressed against the bed, Ekko hovering over you, his jawline trailed down as he trailed kisses down your own. Your breath hitched as he found a sensitive spot. Your fingers tightening in his braids, he hummed against your skin, clearly pleased by the reaction. You're so beautiful, he murmured, his voice relevant. Your heart swelled with the sincerity in his tone. So are you, you whispered, running your fingers along his jawline. You have no idea. He chuckled, pressing a kiss to the corner of your mouth before pulling back slightly to look at you. His eyes was filled with affection, brighter than you'd ever seen them. You make me feel like I can do anything, he admitted, his voice barely audible. That's because you can, you replied, cupping his face. But you don't have to do it alone. He leaned into your touch, closing his eyes for a moment as if committing that feeling to memory. When he opened them again, the weight that had been there earlier was gone, replaced by something lighter. Thank you, he said simply, his voice full of emotion. You smiled, pulling him down for another kiss. This one was softer and slower, a promise that no matter what, you'd face the future together. As the night stretched on, the two of you remained tangled within one another, sharing whispered confessions and stolen kisses until sleep finally claimed the both of you.